February 23, 1943, Telefunken headquarters, Berlin. The magnification tool trembled subtly in Obstatelrunga's grasp as he studied the copper assembly recovered from the debris 3 weeks prior. "This is beyond comprehension," he scribbled in the top-secret technical assessment. No nation possessed the ability to achieve such minute construction while simultaneously generating such immense power output. Through the laboratory windows, he observed the plumes of smoke ascending from the devastated manufacturing facilities scattered across the city, undeniable evidence of the Allies' aerial dominance. Yet, resting on his workbench was the tangible proof that the technological disparity was far more severe than any member of the German High Command had dared to acknowledge. The apparatus before him, salvaged from a fallen British Stirling bomber near Rotterdam on the night of February 2nd, measured a mere 10 centimeters in width. This cavity magnetron, as the British designated it, produced microwave radar frequencies, rendering every German defensive measure obsolete. Its design was elegantly simple, its implications terrifyingly profound, and it surpassed anything German scientific endeavors had yet conceived. What Runge and his associates failed to grasp at that moment was that this solitary copper component would unravel a mystery that was costing Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz 40 submarines monthly. This hemorrhaging of personnel and materiel threatened to seal Germany's fate in the Battle of the Atlantic within mere weeks. The mathematical certainty of German defeat was being dictated not by naval strategy, but by electromagnetic waves that German radar detection systems were incapable of perceiving. The psychological shift had commenced. On that frigid February morning in Rotterdam, local resistance fighters had witnessed German soldiers cordoning off the crash site with an unusual degree of urgency. The Stirling bomber, bearing the serial number R9264 from 7th Squadron RAF, had been en route back from only its second operational sortie when anti-aircraft fire ripped through its port wing. The entire crew of 7 perished instantly in the impact, but their ultimate sacrifice would prove immeasurably more valuable to the Allied cause than they could have possibly foreseen. The aircraft carried Britain's most advanced secret weapon, the H-2S ground mapping radar system, engineered to enable bombers to navigate and pinpoint targets irrespective of cloud cover or darkness. At its core resided the cavity magnetron, a device so revolutionary that Winston Churchill himself had wrestled with its deployment, harboring exactly the fears that had now materialized. The bomber had been part of a bombing raid on Cologne, following the H-2S radar's operational debut against Hamburg just 3 days earlier, on January 30th, 1943. General der Luftwaffe-Nachrichtentruppe Wolfgang Martini, Chief of Luftwaffe Signals Intelligence and a foremost German radar authority, was notified of the crash within hours. As the officer responsible for all German radar development and signals intelligence, Martini immediately understood that the Rotterdam incident could provide answers to questions that had been troubling German commanders for months. His position at the helm of the Luftwaffe's entire communications and radar infrastructure made him uniquely qualified to evaluate any technology the British bomber might contain. Martini dispatched his most seasoned technical teams to the crash site. Their initial assessment confirmed both his gravest concerns and his most fervent hopes simultaneously. The bomber's fuselage housed equipment unlike anything German forces had previously encountered. The rotating antenna array, the cathode ray display, the sophisticated power supply, all indicated advanced radar technology operating on principles that German engineers had theoretically explored but deemed impractical for operational implementation. However, when his technicians meticulously extracted the transmitter unit from the wreckage, examining the component that powered this enigmatic system, they discovered something that defied German comprehension of physics and engineering. The magnetron itself, a British model identified as CV-64, comprised a solid copper cylinder approximately 8 centimeters in diameter and 12 centimeters in length. 8 cylindrical resonant cavities had been precisely machined into the copper, symmetrically arranged around a central cathode. The entire assembly was encircled by powerful permanent magnets. Its appearance was deceptively straightforward, yet preliminary field tests indicated it generated substantial microwave power at frequencies that German equipment could neither produce nor reliably detect. Martini ordered the immediate, heavily guarded transport of the device to Berlin. He had witnessed enough to realize this discovery could explain the unprecedented losses being sustained by Dönitz's U-boats. The British had accomplished what German science had declared impossible: a compact, potent microwave radar system adaptable for installation in aircraft and vessels, offering detection capabilities against which Germany possessed no defenses and no countermeasures. The journey from enigma to revelation had, in fact, begun months earlier amidst the somber waters of the North Atlantic. Throughout late 1942 and early 1943, U-boat captains reported increasingly alarming encounters with Allied aircraft that appeared to possess uncanny detection abilities. Kapitänleutnant Hans Joachim Schwanke, commanding U-43, had submitted a report in December 1942 that exemplified the escalating crisis. His vessel was transiting the Bay of Biscay on a moonless night, running on the surface to replenish its batteries, when searchlights suddenly illuminated them from directly overhead. There had been no warning from the Metox radar detector, no sound of engines, nothing to indicate an approaching aircraft. Depth charges bracketed his submerged U-boat, inflicting severe damage that necessitated an emergency return to port. "We were blind," Schwanke recorded in his war diary. "The Metox gave no alarm. The aircraft appeared as if conjured from the darkness itself. Only sheer luck saved us. We heard the bombs falling and crash-dived with seconds to spare. Our detector should have alerted us minutes earlier, affording us ample time for a safe dive. Instead, we received no warning whatsoever. Either the British have developed radar our detectors cannot sense, or they are employing some other technology unknown to us. Regardless of the explanation, we are being pursued by adversaries we cannot detect until the very moment of attack." Similar reports flooded U-boat headquarters in Paris throughout the winter. Vessels were being surprised on the surface at night without prior warning. Aircraft seemed capable of seeing through darkness and weather conditions that should have provided concealment. The Metox radar detectors, which had previously offered U-boats ample warning of aircraft equipped with older ASV Mk radar systems operating at 1.5-meter wavelengths, had become worse than useless, as captains still relied on them for adequate notification. The statistics painted a grim picture destined to become catastrophic by spring. In November 1942, German U-boats sank approximately 119 merchant vessels, totaling 729,000 tons globally, while losing 13 submarines. December saw 60 merchant ships, totaling 330,000 tons, sunk with 5 U-boats lost. By January 1943, sinkings decreased to 37 ships, while U-boat losses climbed to 7. February witnessed 34 merchant vessels sunk and 17 U-boats lost. The attrition rate, once heavily favoring Germany, was collapsing at an accelerating pace. Admiral Karl Dönitz, promoted to Commander-in-Chief of the entire Navy on January 30, 1943, while retaining direct command of U-boat operations through his subordinate staff, observed these figures with mounting alarm. His headquarters meticulously plotted every U-boat's position, every convoy route, and every engagement. The patterns emerging from these plots defied conventional naval warfare logic. U-boats approaching convoys under cover of darkness were being intercepted before they could launch their attacks. Vessels transiting the Bay of Biscay at night were being bombed with pinpoint accuracy. Submarines proceeding submerged during daylight hours were somehow being located and targeted with depth charges. Allied aircraft appeared to possess an almost supernatural ability to locate submarines in conditions where visual detection should have been impossible. The prevailing weather during many of these attacks entirely precluded visual identification. Yet the assaults were executed with devastating precision. Korvettenkapitän and Kapitänleutnant Karl-Heinz Hessler, Dönitz's son-in-law, who had married his daughter Ursula in November 1937, served as first staff officer at U-boat headquarters. Hessler dedicated weeks to analyzing combat reports, seeking an explanation for the perplexing losses. The pattern was evident but inexplicable. Allied detection capabilities had undergone a dramatic and rapid improvement between late 1942 and early 1943, suggesting the deployment of new technology rather than enhanced tactics or training. But what technology could penetrate darkness, clouds, and fog? What could detect a submarine's diminutive conning tower from miles away? What could track a periscope wake or a snorkel exhaust in conditions where human observers would be utterly blind? The questions proliferated at a rate far exceeding the discovery of answers. Dönitz convened emergency meetings with Germany's leading scientists and engineers throughout January and February 1943. The discussions revealed a disturbing lack of awareness regarding Allied capabilities and a troubling complacency regarding German technological superiority. German radar experts maintained that no radar system could function effectively at wavelengths shorter than approximately 50 centimeters due to fundamental limitations in power generation. The vacuum tube technology available, they argued, was simply incapable of producing sufficient power at higher frequencies to render shorter wavelength radar practical for military applications. The Metox detectors, designed to identify Allied radar operating at 1.5 meter wavelengths, should theoretically have provided U-boats with several minutes warning, allowing them to crash dive before the aircraft could reach attack range. Yet, it was becoming abundantly clear that they were no longer providing adequate notification. Something in Allied capabilities had fundamentally changed. But what? Some scientists theorized that the Allies had developed infrared detection systems capable of sensing the heat from U-boat diesel exhausts. Others suggested acoustic detection, although this seemed improbable at the operational distances involved. A few voices cautiously mentioned the theoretical potential of centimetric radar employing advanced magnetron technology, but this was largely dismissed as impractical. Germany's own research into such systems had concluded that they offered no tactical advantage commensurate with the immense development investment required. The British could not possibly have overcome challenges that had defeated German engineering, the experts assured Dönitz. German science was preeminent globally. If German engineers had determined that centimetric radar was impractical, then it must indeed be so. The Allies must be employing an alternative approach, perhaps a combination of multiple detection methods. The notion that Britain, enduring years of strategic bombing with its industrial infrastructure under constant assault, could have developed revolutionary radar technology superior to anything Germany possessed, seemed utterly preposterous to many German specialists. This complacent certainty would be completely shattered when Runge's team at Telefunken began their examination of the Rotterdam device. The magnetron arrived in Berlin on February 5, 1943, accompanied by photographic documentation of the complete H2S installation and detailed reports from the crash site. Runge assembled Germany's foremost microwave specialists for what would become known as the Rotterdam Working Group, or Arbeidskraft Rotterdam. Their mandate was to ascertain precisely what the device was, how it functioned, and, most crucially, what capabilities it afforded the Allies. The initial session of this working group convened on February 22nd or 23rd at Telefunken's Berlin offices. The preliminary examination on February 6th illuminated the magnetron's fundamental operational principle. Within hours, it was understood that the cylindrical cavities served as resonant chambers, generating and amplifying electromagnetic oscillations as electrons traverse the magnetic field generated by the permanent magnets. This concept bore a resemblance to earlier split-anode magnetron designs that German engineers had explored in the 1930s, but its execution displayed a level of engineering sophistication that astounded the German team. Dr. Otto Hackenberg, a young physicist tasked with documenting the examination, would later recall the moment of revelation in post-war interviews. When we first energized the magnetron using laboratory power supplies, the frequency counter registered 3.3 gigahertz, a frequency we could barely measure, let alone generate with any significant power. The output meter indicated 40 kilowatts of peak power. It was akin to discovering the enemy-possessed artillery when you believed the battlefield was limited to rifles. We grasped immediately why the Metox was rendered useless. It was designed to detect meter-wavelength radar operating around 1.5 meters, or 200 megahertz. This device operated at a 9.1 centimeter wavelength, more than 16 times shorter. Our detectors were completely deaf and blind to this radiation. The electromagnetic spectrum the British were exploiting lay entirely outside the range our warning receivers could detect. We had been fighting in the dark, oblivious to the fact that the enemy could perceive us with perfect clarity while we saw nothing. Runge's team toiled around the clock for 2 weeks, reverse engineering the complete H2S system from the wreckage and the recovered components. The magnetron powered a rotating antenna that scanned a 360-degree arc below the aircraft. The returns appeared on a plan position indicator cathode ray display, generating a map-like image that depicted coastlines, cities, rivers, and terrain features with remarkable definition. For the first time, bomber crews could navigate and identify targets in absolute darkness or through impenetrable cloud cover. The system had been primarily conceived for strategic bombing navigation, enabling Pathfinder aircraft to mark targets for following bomber formations regardless of meteorological conditions. British bombers could now assault Germany in weather that had previously offered natural sanctuary. However, the implications for submarine warfare were even more far-reaching than their bombing applications. The identical cavity magnetron technology, adapted for air-to-surface search radar, designated ASV Mk, could detect a submarine's conning tower from a distance of 20 meters in any weather, day or night. The minimal radar cross-section that had previously shielded submarines from detection was rendered utterly insignificant against this sensitive, high-frequency system operating within the centimetric wavelength band. Even more critically, the microwave emissions were entirely undetectable by German radar warning receivers. All existing German detection equipment, including the Metox system upon which U-boats depended, operated within the meter wavelength range. The Metox could detect radar operating between 1.3 and 2.6 meters wavelength, encompassing the frequency range of ASV Mk radar that had equipped Allied aircraft through 1942. But this new centimetric radar operated at 9.1 centimeters, a frequency 17 times higher than anything German warning receivers were capable of detecting. U-boats were sailing blindly into enemy attacks, their defensive systems rendered obsolete without their knowledge. The technological surprise was absolute and devastating. On February 23, 1943, the Rotterdam Working Group presented their findings to German military and industrial leadership. While no documentary evidence confirms the personal attendance of either Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring or Admiral Dönitz at this technical working group meeting, both were undoubtedly briefed on the outcomes. Representatives from every major German electronics firm were present, including engineers from Telefunken, Siemens, AEG, and Lorenz. Senior Luftwaffe signals officers and naval technical specialists filled the conference room at Telefunken headquarters. The atmosphere was somber. Runge commenced his presentation with a statement that would be recorded in the minutes and later recovered by Allied investigators after the war. "We must report with complete frankness that the British have achieved a technological breakthrough of extraordinary significance. The cavity magnetron represents an advance in microwave generation that surpasses German capabilities by at least 3 years of normal development. More critically for current operations, the device enables radar detection systems against which we possess no countermeasures and no defenses." The presentation detailed the technical specifications of the CV-64 magnetron: 8 resonant cavities machined into a copper block, operating at a 3.3 GHz frequency with a 9.1 centimeter wavelength, a peak power output of 40 kilowatts, a compact construction suitable for aircraft installation, a robust design capable of withstanding combat conditions, and production quality indicative of established manufacturing processes rather than experimental prototypes. The implications were dire. If the British could manufacture these devices in quantity, and the production quality suggested they could, then every Allied aircraft and vessel could potentially be equipped with radar systems against which Germany had no defense. The Metox warning receivers were rendered useless. The extensive network of German radar installations operating in the meter wavelength range would become increasingly obsolete. German night fighters, German anti-aircraft defenses, German naval vessels, all relied on radar technology that the British had leapfrogged by an entire generation. When Göring was briefed on these findings, possibly at the Humboldtine Flak Tower in Berlin, where the reassembled H-2S system was demonstrated, his reaction was reportedly one of considerable consternation. The Reichsmarschall, who had boasted in 1939 that no enemy aircraft would ever bomb Germany, now faced evidence that British bombers could navigate and bomb in any weather conditions using technology Germany could not match. Dönitz, when briefed through his staff channels, grasped the implications more acutely than anyone else in the German High Command. His U-boat force had lost 39 submarines in the first 2 months of 1943, 17 in January and February combined, though records show 7 in January and 17 in February for a total of 24, with additional boats lost in December, bringing recent losses to 39 over the 3-month period. If this trend persisted, the U-boat campaign would collapse within months. Kapitän zur See Harald Netzband, who served as Dönitz's operations chief and had been promoted to Konteradmiral in March 1943, maintained detailed statistical analyses of U-boat operations. The numbers painted an increasingly grim picture. In the first quarter of 1943, German U-boats were being lost at a faster rate than they could be replaced, despite shipyard production running at approximately 20 to 24 boats per month. More critically, experienced crews were being lost faster than training programs could replenish them. The meeting attendees reached several sobering conclusions that were documented in classified reports later captured by Allied forces. First, Germany could not replicate the cavity magnetron in operationally significant numbers before 1944 at the earliest. The precision machining required to create the resonant cavities, the specialized copper alloys, the powerful permanent magnets utilizing cobalt that Germany lacked in sufficient quantities, and the manufacturing expertise necessary were all beyond immediate German capabilities. Even a crash program would take months to establish production lines. Second, developing effective countermeasures would require a minimum of 6 months. A new generation of radar warning receivers tuned to centimetric frequencies could theoretically be designed, but production and installation across the entire U-boat fleet would extend well into 1944. The technical challenges of building receivers capable of detecting 3.3 GHz emissions were formidable, given Germany's limited experience with microwave technology. Third, and most devastatingly, the British almost certainly possessed variants of this technology beyond what had been captured. The Rotterdam device operated at 9.1 centimeters. Allied scientists had likely already developed or were actively developing 3-centimeter systems that would render even new German countermeasures obsolete before they were deployed. The technological race was not merely lost, it was unwinnable in the war's current time frame, given the Allied head start and superior industrial capacity. Dönitz absorbed these briefings with growing understanding of the catastrophe facing his command. His U-boat headquarters, which had relocated to the Paris area in March 1942 after the Saint-Nazaire commando raid, exposed the vulnerability of the previous Lorient location, maintained detailed plots of every engagement, every loss, every tactical development. The maps on the operations room walls told the story more clearly than any statistical analysis. Red pins marking U-boat positions had thinned dramatically across the North Atlantic. Blue pins indicating Allied convoys seemed to flow through areas where wolf packs should have intercepted them. Black pins, the markers of U-boat losses, clustered along transit routes through the Bay of Biscay and in the operational areas where boats encountered Allied air patrols. "We have been fighting blind," Dönitz told his senior staff in briefings following the Rotterdam device examination. "Every advantage we believed we possessed has been neutralized by Allied technology we did not know existed. Surprise attack at night meant nothing when the enemy could see in complete darkness. The vast expanse of the Atlantic provided no concealment when radar could detect a conning tower from 20 meters away. Our radar warning systems gave us false confidence while providing no actual protection against this new threat." The question facing Dönitz was stark. What could be done? While German industry scrambled to develop countermeasures that might not arrive until 1944, Hessler proposed several tactical adaptations. All U-boat commanders would be informed that radar warning systems were unreliable and should not be trusted to provide adequate warning of air attack. Boats would be ordered to remain submerged as much as possible, surfacing only when absolutely necessary to recharge batteries or transit at higher speed. Anti-aircraft armament would be increased on all boats, though this was recognized as a desperate measure against aircraft that could detect U-boats long before the boats could see the aircraft. Most critically, Dönitz and his staff began preparing for the possibility that the U-boat campaign in the Atlantic might become unsustainable. If losses continued at current rates while Allied shipbuilding capacity continued expanding, the strategic mathematics would become impossible. Germany would be losing the war of tonnage, unable to sink merchant ships faster than Allied shipyards could replace them. March 1943 proved both the apex and the beginning of the end for Dönitz's U-boat force. The largest convoy battles of the war were fought that month with massive wolf packs of 30 to 40 boats attempting to overwhelm convoy defenses through sheer numbers. For a brief moment, it seemed the strategy might work despite the growing Allied technological advantage. Convoys HX-229 and SC-122, sailing together through the North Atlantic in mid-March, were attacked by approximately 40 U-boats from 3 wolf packs. The battle raged from March 16th to 20th, 1943. 21 merchant ships, totaling 141,000 tons, were sunk, the highest losses from any single convoy battle of the war. The British Admiralty issued an internal assessment that Germany had never come closer to severing Britain's Atlantic lifeline, but the cost to Germany was unsustainable. The U-boats attacking these convoys lost one boat definitively, U-384, with several others damaged. However, the broader March statistics showed 12 to 15 U-boats lost during the month, depending on classification methodology, with many losses occurring in areas outside the major convoy battles. The mathematics were inescapable, even when achieving tactical success in sinking merchant ships. The strategic picture was deteriorating. Allied shipyards, particularly the rapidly expanding American construction program, were producing merchant vessels faster than U-boats could sink them. The Liberty ship program had reduced construction time from over 200 days in 1941 to an average of 42 days by 1944. While individual ships like the SS Robert E. Peary were built in record time, 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes in November 1942, these were propaganda achievements rather than standard production rates. Nevertheless, American yards were launching approximately 3 Liberty ships every 2 days at peak production, a rate of roughly 1.5 ships daily. German U-boats, sinking an average of 3,000 to 5,000 tons per boat before being destroyed, could not match this production rate. As long as Allied shipyards could replace losses faster than U-boats could inflict them, the campaign represented strategic defeat disguised as tactical success. The only way to win the tonnage war was to maintain an unsustainable exchange ratio while simultaneously avoiding losses that Germany could not replace. The true catastrophe came in May 1943, the month that would become known among U-boat crews as Black May. Throughout the month, Allied aircraft and surface escorts equipped with centimeter ASV Mk radar and Type 271 shipboard radar savaged the U-boat force with unprecedented effectiveness. The convoy battle for ONS-5 in late April and early May marked the turning point. This slow convoy of 43 merchantmen, protected by 16 escorts, was attacked by approximately 30 U-boats. The Germans managed to sink 12 to 13 merchant ships, but lost 6 to 7 U-boats, with an additional 5 to 7 severely damaged. For the first time in a major convoy battle, the U-boats suffered losses approaching their successes. The exchange ratio had become unsustainable. 2 weeks later, convoy SC-130 demonstrated complete Allied dominance. Of 37 to 38 merchant ships in the convoy, 0 were lost, despite attacks by 25 to 33 U-boats from 3 patrol lines. The German forces lost 3 to 5 U-boats, including U-954. The decisive Allied victory represented the last seriously threatened convoy. Throughout May, the losses mounted relentlessly. On May 4th, U-209 was sunk in the North Atlantic with all 46 crew lost. On May 5th, U-447 and U-663 were both destroyed. May 6th saw U-465 and U-563 sunk. May 11th brought losses of U-89, U-86, and U-456. May 12th saw U-528 depth-charged with all hands lost. May 15th brought the destruction of U-176. May 19th saw the loss of U-273 and U-954. The loss of U-954 on May 19, 1943, carried particular personal weight for Admiral Dönitz. The Type XXI U-boat, commanded by Kapitän-Leutnant Otto Loh, carried among its crew Lieutenant zur See Peter Dönitz, the Admiral's youngest son, serving as watch officer. The boat was attacking convoy SC-130 when it was detected by the River-class frigate HMS Jed and the Black-class sloop HMS Sennen. The British escorts prosecuted the contact with Hedgehog anti-submarine mortars and depth charges. The Hedgehog weapon, introduced in 1942, represented a significant tactical advance over conventional depth charges. Rather than exploding at preset depths, regardless of whether they hit the target, Hedgehog projectiles exploded only on contact. This meant that when explosions occurred, they confirmed a hit, rather than simply disturbing the water and making sonar tracking difficult. U-954 was destroyed with all 47 crew members killed at coordinates 54.54 north, 34.19 west. The loss was reported to Dönitz by secure telegraph. U-954 attacked and sunk by British escorts HMS Jed and Sennen. Hedgehog weapons achieved direct hit. No survivors. Your son is gone. Dönitz did not pause operations or take leave. There would be time for grief after the war if Germany survived. For now, his duty was to the approximately 40,000 submariners under his command, the living, who still depended on his decisions. The personal loss, devastating as it was, could not be allowed to interfere with operational responsibilities at this critical moment when the entire U-boat campaign faced potential collapse. By May 22, 1943, the operational U-boat force had lost between 41 and 43 boats during the month, depending on classification methodology. U-boat.net lists 42 boats lost with 10,650 men killed and 1,837 survivors. Other sources cite 41 combat losses, or 43, including boats stricken from operational roles. Regardless of the exact figure, the losses represented approximately 25% of operational U-boat strength, making the month catastrophically unsustainable for German naval operations. Dönitz called his operations staff into emergency session on May 24, 1943. The plot board showed a catastrophe unprecedented in U-boat operations. A quarter of the operational force destroyed in 3 weeks. Casualty rates exceeding any previous period. Experienced commanders dying faster than training schools could replace them. New boats being sunk on their first patrols before crews learned combat survival techniques. The youngest generation of officers, the men who would have led the force in 1944 and 1945, were drowning in the Atlantic at 23 and 24 years old, their potential forever lost. On May 24, 1943, Dönitz made the most painful decision of his career. He drafted the order that effectively conceded defeat in the Battle of the Atlantic. To all U-boats at sea, due to superiority of enemy location equipment and overwhelming air coverage, North Atlantic operations are temporarily suspended, effective immediately. All boats currently in the North Atlantic are to withdraw to positions southwest of the Azores. Boats transiting to operational areas are to proceed to Biscay ports. Further operations will await development of improved detection equipment and enhanced anti-aircraft capabilities. We have not surrendered. We have recognized reality. The immediate statistical impact was dramatic. In June 1943, only 17 merchant ships were sunk in the Atlantic. In July, only 9. The Allied supply line, which had seemed on the verge of being severed in March, became secure. The vast convoys that would support D-Day and the liberation of Europe began assembling in American ports, protected by technology that had rendered Germany's most effective weapon obsolete. But the human toll on the U-boat force continued throughout the remaining years of the war. Of the approximately 40,000 men who served in U-boats during the war, approximately 30,000 would die, representing a 75% casualty rate, the highest of any military service on either side. They drowned in steel cylinders, crushed by depth charges. They suffocated when air systems failed under prolonged depth charge attack. They burned when diesel fuel ignited from combat damage. They froze in the North Atlantic or cooked in tropical waters when boats were forced to remain submerged for extended periods. They died knowing their equipment was inferior, their missions increasingly futile, their sacrifice changing nothing in the war's strategic outcome. Yet they continued fighting because duty demanded it, and because abandoning the struggle would free Allied air and naval forces for other theaters, hastening defeat on all fronts. The interrogation reports from captured crews during summer and fall of 1943 revealed the profound psychological impact of technological inferiority. Allied intelligence officers, initially confused by the defeatism among prisoners who had been fanatical believers in German victory just months earlier, gradually recognized they were witnessing a unique phenomenon. These men had not been defeated in conventional battle. They had been rendered obsolete by science, hunted by technology. they could neither see nor counter. Kapitän-Leutnant Vera Henker, commanding U-515, achieved considerable success during his command, sinking multiple merchant ships and earning the Knight's Cross. However, his boat was sunk on April 9, 1944, by U.S. Task Group 2.3, consisting of the escort carrier USS Guadalcanal and destroyer escorts. Approximately 40 crew members were captured, including Henker. During interrogation at Fort Hunt, Virginia, officially designated P.O. Box 1142, Henker provided detailed testimony that was classified until 1985. The interrogation transcripts, declassified decades later, reveal the profound demoralization caused by the Allied radar advantage and provide valuable historical insight into German understanding of their technological disadvantage. We knew by mid-1943 that the war was lost. Henker told his interrogators during sessions conducted between May 3 and June 15, 1944. Not because German soldiers lacked courage or skill, but because Allied technology was systematically destroying every advantage we once possessed. The Metox detector became useless against the new radar. We called it the grave bell among crews because when it failed to warn of approaching aircraft, it rang only for our funerals. Later models that could detect centimeter radar arrived too late for most boats. The Naxos system, introduced in September 1943, could theoretically detect the new radar. But even when it worked, we could only detect emissions at short range. While Allied aircraft detected us from beyond visual distance, we could dive when warned, but aircraft would circle overhead, calling destroyers to depth charge us. We could not escape what we could not see until it was too late. Henker's interrogation took a dark turn when he was falsely accused of war crimes related to survivors of the SS Ceramic, a liner sunk by U-515 in December 1942. Threatened with extradition to Britain to face charges, Henker became increasingly desperate. On June 15, 1944, he attempted to escape by climbing the perimeter fence at Fort Hunt. He was shot and killed by guards, becoming the only prisoner to attempt to escape from the facility during World War II. Oberleutnant zur See Herbert Wehrer survived the war after serving on 5 different U-boats, including surviving the sinking of U-612 in August 1942 and U-415 in July 1944. His post-war memoir, Iron Coffins, a personal account of the German U-boat battles of World War II, first published in 1969, became one of the most widely read and respected accounts of the U-boat war from the German perspective. Wehrer described the psychological impact of fighting against superior Allied technology. Every patrol after May 1943 was a survival exercise disguised as a military operation. We understood that Allied radar could detect our periscope wake, our snorkel exhaust, even our conning tower when awash. We traveled submerged far longer than boats were designed to endure, breathing foul air, conserving battery power, surfacing only when fuel and oxygen forced us. The Atlantic, which we had dominated in 1942, became an enemy more dangerous than British destroyers. It hid Allied aircraft above fog and Allied ships beyond horizons, while revealing our every movement to enemies equipped with technology that gave them complete tactical advantage. We were being hunted by forces we could not detect until the moment of attack. Korvettenkapitän Peter Erich Kremer, who commanded U-333 through multiple successful patrols, survived the war as one of only 3 senior U-boat commanders to do so. His memoirs, published as U-Boat Commander, a periscope view of the Battle of the Atlantic by the Naval Institute Press in 1984, provided another valuable perspective on the technological revolution that defeated the U-boat force. Kremer recalled a patrol in June 1943, shortly after the withdrawal from the North Atlantic. We were ordered to patrol off the African coast, seeking isolated targets away from heavy air coverage. Even there, Allied aircraft appeared with impossible frequency, given the vast ocean areas involved. One afternoon, we detected an enemy aircraft at extreme range with our new Wanzek radar warning receiver. I ordered immediate dive to 150 meters and rigged for silent running. We stayed down 6 hours, far beyond safe operational limits. When we carefully surfaced to snorkel, the same aircraft or another reappeared within minutes, forcing us down again. This pattern continued for 14 hours until our batteries were nearly exhausted. We had to surface or suffocate. When we broached, the aircraft was waiting, positioned perfectly for attack. Only frantic anti-aircraft fire and a crash dive that nearly imploded the pressure hull saved us. We never fired a torpedo that patrol. We spent 3 weeks attempting to evade detection long enough to attack anything. Allied mastery of the technological domain was so complete, we could barely execute our basic mission. The technical investigations continued through 1943 and 1944, as German engineers desperately attempted to develop countermeasures. They produced the LMX-10 magnetron, a direct copy of the British CV-64 design, with at least 4 units delivered by May 1943. However, production was severely constrained by material shortages, particularly the cobalt required for permanent magnets. Most of the early units required magnets salvaged from other captured aircraft, making large-scale production impossible. Telefunken began developing an indigenous German magnetron designated LMX-12, attempting to adapt the British design to materials available in Germany. But this development would not reach even limited production until April 1944, far too late to affect the war's outcome. By that point, the Battle of the Atlantic had been decisively lost for nearly a year. Actual production of German cavity magnetrons totaled several hundred units across all variants by war's end, with estimates suggesting fewer than 1,000 total units produced. This contrasted starkly with Allied production, which numbered in the tens of thousands. While exact production figures for 1943 remain unclear, the disparity in industrial capacity and available materials meant Germany could never hope to match Allied production rates. Radar warning receivers that could detect centimetric frequencies were developed in parallel efforts. The Naxos system, designated Fuge 350 Naxos Z for aircraft and FUMB-7 Naxos U for U-boats, was introduced in September 1943. The system could theoretically warn U-boats of approaching aircraft equipped with ASV Mk radar operating at 9.1 centimeter wavelength. However, by the time Naxos entered operational service, Allied scientists had already developed 3 centimeter radar systems against which Naxos was blind. The H-2X radar, used by American forces, and the advanced versions of H-2S operated at 3 centimeter wavelength, requiring entirely new detection equipment. The Germans were perpetually 1 generation behind, forever attempting to counter yesterday's threats, while new systems rendered their countermeasures obsolete before they could be widely deployed. A Junkers Ju-88 night fighter equipped with Naxos radar warning equipment did land at an RAF airfield, though not in November 1943 as sometimes reported. On July 13, 1944, a Ju-88 G1 landed at RAF Woodbridge carrying Fuji 350 Naxos Z, Freya homing equipment, and Liechtenstein SN2 radar. The crew had become disoriented and believed they were landing at a German base. British technical intelligence immediately examined the equipment, gaining valuable insight into German countermeasure capabilities. The examination revealed that while German engineering was sophisticated and the Naxos system worked as designed, it remained fundamentally defensive. It could warn of Allied radar emissions, but provided no offensive capability. More critically, it could only detect the 9.1 centimeter emissions of first-generation Allied centimetric radar, not the newer 3-centimeter systems already entering service. The German Navy also attempted tactical adaptations to cope with Allied radar superiority. U-boats were fitted with additional anti-aircraft guns, with some boats designated as flak boats carrying quad 20mm mounts and heavy AA armament. The prevailing strategy was that if submarines could not evade radar-equipped aircraft, they ought to remain surfaced and engage them with anti-aircraft weaponry. This proved a catastrophic approach. Allied aircraft could detect submarines from ranges far beyond the effective combat distance of anti-aircraft guns. Aircraft could approach from any direction, frequently attacking from the sun's glare or utilizing cloud cover, leaving submarine crews mere seconds to man their weapons and respond. The aircraft's superior speed allowed it to dictate the terms of engagement, while the submarines were rendered static targets, passively awaiting attack. Radio communications from submarines under assault brought forth additional enemy forces, including surface vessels capable of effortlessly dispatching a stationary submarine. The flak boat initiative resulted in the loss of more submarines than aircraft destroyed, marking yet another failed attempt to counter the Allied technological edge through tactical means alone. Acoustic homing torpedoes, designated as the Zaunkönig, or T5, were introduced in September 1943 as a countermeasure against convoy escorts. The initial 80 torpedoes were delivered on August 1, 1943, with widespread deployment commencing against convoys ONS-18 and 2022 in late September. These torpedoes were designed to track the propeller noise of escort vessels, theoretically enabling submarines to eliminate escorts before engaging merchant ships. Initial results showed promise, with several escorts damaged or sunk. However, the Allies rapidly devised countermeasures, including the Foxer device, a noisemaker towed behind ships to decoy the acoustic torpedoes. More critically, acoustic torpedoes could not compensate for the fundamental German inability to locate Allied convoys in the first place. If Allied radar detected submarines before they could approach convoys, acoustic torpedoes offered no advantage. New submarine designs incorporating snorkel systems represented another endeavor to adapt to Allied technological supremacy. The snorkel, a Dutch invention from 1938, captured when Germany overran the Netherlands in 1940, was initially disregarded. German engineers commenced testing snorkel systems on submarine U-58 in the summer of 1943, with operational use beginning in early 1944. The snorkel permitted diesel engines to operate while submerged at periscope depth, enabling battery recharging and transit without surfacing, thereby reducing vulnerability to radar-equipped aircraft. However, snorkels were far from a perfect solution. They produced a wake visible to radar, particularly in calm seas. They constrained speed to a few knots. They demanded exceptional seamanship in rough weather, as waves washing over the snorkel head would trigger automatic valves, momentarily cutting off air supply and causing uncomfortable and hazardous pressure fluctuations within the submarine. By mid-1944, approximately 50% of submarines operating from French bases were equipped with snorkels. While this somewhat improved survival rates, it could not reverse the fundamental strategic defeat. Submarines fitted with snorkels could evade some attacks, but they could not sink enough merchant vessels to disrupt Allied logistics. The Battle of the Atlantic had already been decisively lost. The groundbreaking Type XXI electric submarine represented Germany's most ambitious attempt to achieve technological parity. This radical design featured a streamlined hull, triple battery capacity, a submerged speed of 17.2 knots compared to the 6.7 knots of conventional Type 7 boats, 6 bow torpedo tubes with hydraulic reloading capabilities, allowing 18 torpedoes to be fired in under 20 minutes, and sophisticated sonar systems. The Type 21 could theoretically outrun most surface escorts while submerged and remain underwater for extended periods. Had this design entered service in 1943 rather than 1945, it might have significantly prolonged the Battle of the Atlantic. However, hurried production resulted in severe quality issues. Of the 118 submarines constructed, only 4 were fully combat-ready before the war's conclusion. Only 2 undertook combat patrols in April and May 1945, failing to achieve any sinkings before Germany's surrender. The final submarine patrol of the war exemplified both the potential and the futility of German technological endeavors. U-2511, the first Type 21 electric submarine to see operational service, departed on April 30, 1945, commanded by Korvettenkapitän Adalbert Schnee, one of Germany's most experienced and successful submarine commanders. Schnee's patrol showcased the Type 21's remarkable capabilities. On May 4, 1945, U-2511 detected a British cruiser task force and executed a flawless attack approach, reaching firing position undetected despite Allied radar coverage. The submarine's superior underwater speed and silent running capabilities allowed it to close to attack range without detection. Schnee did not fire. Germany had already announced surrender negotiations. He surfaced and transmitted his position on May 5, 1945, bringing the submarine war to an end, not with conflict, but with the acceptance of defeat. In his post-war memoir, Schnee reflected on the bitter irony. "We proved that day what the Type 21 could have achieved had it entered service a year earlier. But such demonstrations were meaningless. The Allies had already won through industrial capacity and technological innovation deployed in 1942 and 1943. Our most advanced technology arrived when the war was already lost." The statistical summary of the Battle of the Atlantic confirms the decisive impact of the cavity magnetron's introduction in early 1943. From January through May 1943, during the period when the first-generation ASV Mk radar was being deployed, but before full operational coverage was achieved, submarines sank 245 merchant ships, totaling approximately 1,289,000 tons. German losses during this period were 95 submarines, including the catastrophic loss of 41 to 43 boats in May alone. From June 1943 through May 1944, after centimetric radar equipped most Allied aircraft and ships operating in the Atlantic, merchant ship losses dropped to 185 ships, totaling approximately 819,000 tons, despite more submarines being at sea. German losses during this period climbed to 237 submarines. The exchange rate had reversed completely. In March 1943, at the zenith of submarine effectiveness, Germany sank 82 merchant ships, totaling 476,000 tons in the Atlantic, and 120 ships worldwide, totaling 693,000 tons, while losing 12 submarines. By summer 1943, after the widespread deployment of centimetric radar, typical months saw fewer than 20 merchant ships sunk, while submarine losses remained in double digits. The tonnage war had become unwinnable. The May 1943 convoy battles represented Germany's final opportunity to achieve strategic success in the Atlantic. The examination of the device at Rotterdam in February 1943 had confirmed what many German commanders suspected but hoped was untrue. Allied technological capabilities had advanced far beyond German comprehension, creating detection advantages that no amount of tactical skill or operational courage could overcome. Post-war examination of captured submarines by Allied technical teams revealed desperate German attempts to counteract Allied radar dominance through improvised countermeasures. Some submarines had been coated with experimental radar-absorbent materials, crude stealth attempts that added weight, reduced performance, and provided negligible reduction in radar returns. The materials available to Germany in 1943 to 1944 were inadequate for effective radar absorption at centimetric wavelengths. Others carried inflatable decoy balloons designed to create false radar targets, devices that sometimes worked but could not be deployed while submerged or in heavy seas, limiting their tactical utility. Still others had been fitted with modified exhaust systems intended to minimize the radar signature of schnorkel emissions, modifications that reduced diesel efficiency without eliminating radar detection. Each adaptation represented German engineering ingenuity applied to an essentially insoluble problem. One cannot conceal oneself from electromagnetic radiation using purely mechanical solutions. The physics were unforgiving. Allied radar operated at wavelengths and power levels that rendered submarines visible regardless of weather, darkness, or evasive maneuvers. Only remaining completely submerged offered any protection. But battery technology in 1943 to 1944 could not support the extended underwater operations that would have been required to avoid detection entirely. German submarines were trapped by the limitations of their own technology. They were visible to enemies they could not see, hunted by weapons they could not effectively counter, and compelled to operate in an electromagnetic environment where the Allies possessed complete dominance. The psychological documentation from German naval personnel provides perhaps the most compelling evidence of the cavity magnetron's war-winning impact. These were not defeated soldiers seeking excuses for failure. They were highly trained technical specialists who understood precisely what had gone wrong. Their testimony, recorded in interrogation reports, letters, and post-war memoirs, consistently emphasizes not tactical errors or operational failures, but fundamental technological obsolescence. They describe the helplessness of confronting enemies who possessed superior detection tools while German defenders remained effectively blind. They explain the fatalism that afflicted crews who knew detection was inevitable, and survival was largely a matter of luck rather than skill. They document the transformation from confident warriors to hunted prey, a psychological shift that occurred not through battlefield defeat, but through technological revelation. When Oberleutnant Wilhelm Runge examined the Rotterdam device in February 1943, he performed an autopsy on German naval strategy. The copper block on his laboratory bench explained every mysterious submarine loss, every impossible aircraft interception, every convoy battle where Allied forces seemed to know German positions before attacks developed. The cavity magnetron revealed that Germany had been fighting the Battle of the Atlantic while deaf and blind to the electromagnetic spectrum, which Allied forces exploited with devastating effectiveness. That revelation, more than any military defeat, shattered German confidence in technological superiority and strategic victory. It convinced German leadership that Allied technological capabilities exceeded German understanding, not merely in radar, but potentially across multiple domains. If the British could develop revolutionary radar systems in secret while enduring years of strategic bombing, what other surprises might they deploy? This psychological effect, the erosion of confident certainty about German technological superiority, influenced German defensive preparations and diverted scarce resources to counterweapon programs that arrived too late to impact the war's outcome. Intelligence assessments following Rotterdam became more cautious, always assuming the enemy possessed weapons beyond current German knowledge. By autumn, production models of Allied centimetric radar equipped hundreds of aircraft and ships. The Type 271 naval radar, utilizing cavity magnetron technology, was installed on convoy escorts starting in 1941, enabling them to detect surfaced submarines at ranges up to 20 kilometers and periscopes at approximately 900 yards. The system operated at a 9.7 centimeter wavelength with 70 kilowatts of peak power. the ASV Mk airborne radar equipped RAF Coastal Command aircraft beginning in March, allowing them to patrol thousands of square kilometers and detect submarines irrespective of visibility conditions. The American H-2X radar, an advanced iteration of H-2S operating at a 3-centimeter wavelength, provided bomber crews with navigation and targeting capabilities that rendered weather and darkness irrelevant to strategic bombing operations. Each system descended from the same revolutionary cavity magnetron technology that Rung had examined in Rotterdam. The Rotterdam device had been the key that unlocked Allied electromagnetic dominance across the entire theater. German attempts to counter this advantage consumed enormous resources for minimal operational effect. The Naxos radar warning receiver program diverted scientific talent and industrial capacity that could have been applied to offensive weapons or other defensive systems. Submarine construction shifted towards designs optimized for underwater operation, reducing the production of conventional boats that might have been more effective in secondary theaters against less sophisticated adversaries. Research programs explored exotic technologies, including underwater television systems, passive sonar arrays, and hydrogen peroxide propulsion for submarines. None of these reached operational status before the war's end. Each represented German engineering excellence, pursuing solutions to problems Allied technology had created and would overcome before German countermeasures could be widely deployed. The final accounting of the Battle of the Atlantic narrates a tale of industrial capacity and technological innovation, overwhelming tactical skill and operational courage. Germany commissioned approximately 1,181 submarines during World War II. Of these, 785 were destroyed, with 648 lost to enemy action and the remainder scuttled, lost to accidents, or stricken from service. Only 156 survived to surrender in May 1945. Of the approximately 40,000 men who served in submarines during the war, approximately 30,000 died, representing a 75% casualty rate. This was the highest casualty rate of any military service on either side of the conflict. These men fought with extraordinary courage and skill. But courage and skill could not overcome the fundamental technological disadvantage created by Allied radar superiority. The cavity magnetron, invented at Birmingham University in 1939 to 1940 and developed by GEC for practical military applications, represented one of the most significant technological breakthroughs of World War II. Its impact extended far beyond immediate military applications. The microwave technology developed for military radar became the foundation for post-war communication systems, television broadcasting, satellite communications, and eventually the microwave ovens found in kitchens worldwide. The industrial expertise developed for magnetron production enabled the electronics revolution of the 1950s and 1960s. The Anglo-American technological cooperation, exemplified by the Tizard mission's sharing of magnetron technology in 1940, established patterns of scientific collaboration that continued through the Cold War and beyond. The decision to deploy revolutionary technology, despite capture risks, influenced military technology policy for decades. The cavity magnetron demonstrated that operational advantage derived from advanced technology outweighed the risks of enemy exploitation, provided that industrial capacity could produce the technology in quantities the enemy could not match. This principle guided Western military development through the jet age, the nuclear era, and into the information age. The willingness to field new capabilities quickly, accepting that adversaries would eventually copy or counter them, proved more effective than attempting to maintain perfect security while technology remained in laboratories. For the German submarine force, the story ended in surrender and scuttling. On May 4, 1945, Grand Admiral Dönitz, briefly serving as German head of state after Hitler's suicide on April 30th, ordered all submarines to cease offensive operations. On May 8th, following Germany's unconditional surrender, Operation Deadlight commenced. All submarines still at sea were ordered to surface, fly black flags, and proceed to designated Allied ports for surrender. Many commanders instead scuttled their boats, unwilling to surrender the vessels in which their comrades had perished. The operational order Rainbow, echoing the scuttling of the German high seas fleet at Scapa Flow in 1919, resulted in over 200 submarines being deliberately sunk by their own crews rather than surrendered to Allied forces. The men who had served in those boats, the 75% who died and the 25% who survived, had fought a campaign decided not by courage or tactics, but by physics and engineering. They had been defeated by electromagnetic radiation generated by a block of copper machined in British factories, installed in Allied aircraft and ships, and deployed in quantities German industry could never match given the material shortages, Allied bombing, and industrial capacity limitations facing the Third Reich. The examination of a single captured radar set in February 1943 had explained their doom, revealing the electromagnetic dimension of warfare in which Germany had been fighting blind while the Allies possessed clear vision. The statistical evidence and the technological analysis both pointed to the same conclusion. The cavity magnetron had turned the tide of the Battle of the Atlantic more decisively than any tactical innovation or strategic decision. When Allied scientists celebrated the magnetron's impact after the war, they often quoted a remark attributed to American physicist Luis Alvarez, who worked on radar development at MIT's radiation laboratory. The cavity magnetron, Alvarez reportedly said, won the Battle of the Atlantic, the air battle over Germany, and ultimately the war. While this claim simplified complex historical causation involving many factors, the technical evidence provided strong support for the magnetron's decisive contribution. Without centimetric radar, Allied convoy losses would likely have remained at unsustainable levels throughout 1943. And without radar-equipped aircraft providing air cover, submarines would have continued operating with relative impunity in areas beyond the range of shore-based air patrols. Without the detection advantage magnetron technology provided, D-Day preparations would have been vulnerable to submarine interdiction of the massive logistics buildup required for the Normandy invasion. The magnetron, derived from fundamental research into microwave physics at Birmingham University, manufactured in tens of thousands of units across American and British factories, and deployed widely enough to provide persistent coverage of critical ocean areas, had created an electromagnetic advantage that tightened inexorably around German naval forces until they could no longer operate effectively. The examination at Telefunken headquarters in February 1943 had been an autopsy, not a diagnosis. By the time German scientists understood what Allied technology had achieved, the strategic outcome was already determined. In the end, the story of the Rotterdam device transcends the specific narrative of radar technology or submarine warfare. It represents the decisive advantage that advanced technology provides when deployed at an industrial scale against opponents who lack the scientific knowledge, industrial capacity, and material resources to match or counter it. It demonstrates the psychological impact of confronting enemies who possess capabilities you cannot match, transforming confident warriors into hunted prey through the revelation of technological inferiority. Most fundamentally, it illustrates how a block of copper 8 centimeters in diameter, precisely machined with 8 resonant cavities arranged around a central cathode, changed the course of history by making the invisible visible and the hidden exposed. The German admirals and scientists who examined that captured radar set understood perhaps more clearly than anyone else in the Third Reich that they were witnessing not just Allied technological ingenuity, but the instrument of German defeat. The mathematics were irrefutable, the physics unforgiving, the strategic implications inescapable. They returned from Berlin to their operational commands, carrying the knowledge that their finest submarines and bravest crews could not overcome the electromagnetic advantage Allied science had created and Allied industry had deployed in war-winning quantities. They fought on because duty demanded it, and hope dies slowly. But they knew. The examination of a single device had shown them the future.